Hello, everyone. This is Linda Westfall from the Software Excellence Academy, powered by the Westfall team. Our sponsor for our webinar series is the ASQ Software Division. I'm very happy to welcome back one of my mentors, Tom Gilb. I've been studying his stuff since I started doing software quality engineering type topics. He's a good friend, and he's going to be talking to us on one of my favorite subjects, which is defect prevention in software systems.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope I can share some insights with you. I actually got several interesting insights when preparing this lecture. And if you take a little photo of the screen, you can get the slides and even follow along during the lecture or after and share them freely. I've got 68 slides, so I've figured out that if I keep to about 40 seconds each on average, it'll take 45 minutes. Whatever happens, on the hour at the very latest, I will shut up and take questions then, no matter where I am in the slides. You have a little overview of what we're going to talk about there. And let's see. Next, let's see. I think I'm going to leave the webinar. No, we don't want to do that. I'm trying to desperately get rid of the keynote. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Have to wing it.
Tom, you're fine. We are just seeing you and the slides. We do not see the...
Oh, right. No, it was covering up my own view of my own slides, but I forgot to push the little red arrow at the top, to which minimizes it. So I'm okay now. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. So our topic is defect prevention in software systems, which is really a set of quality assurance methods. I've defined quality assurance here because not everybody shares exactly the same definition, but I'll simplify it here. It's absolutely anything that makes sure you get the qualities you have planned to get. So absolutely anything covers a lot of ground. Like if you can do it by voodoo or magic, that's a quality assurance method. Okay. Now, defect prevention is avoiding the occurrence of a defect. In other words, it's not finding and fixing bugs. It is preventing the bugs from happening in the first place at all, ever. Okay, so we're preventing the we're not just preventing them from being in the code and going on to test. We're preventing them from existing in the code at all. What is a defect? Well, again, some of you might think it's a bug, and it certainly is sometimes, but it's anything else that you have a rule for that says, for example, if you say all requirements must be unambiguous and clear to the designer or the coder or the tester, then if a requirement is ambiguous or unclear, that's a defect. Now, it's not what we call a bug, but it's a defect in, for example, the requirements. So again, you have to have an official rule. I call these rules, they're very much like laws. Again, what is illegal? The violation of a real law, not the violation of somebody's opinion about what you ought to do. Same idea. My main focus will be one particular method, the IBM Defect Prevention method, but I'm also going to go wide and show you there's a lot more than that. The other focus will be on methods that are especially near and dear to me, but there's a lot more than that too. Okay, so here's the overview. Now, in 2012, my good friend Capers Jones has written many a good book and papers, and still is alive and kicking with a lot of interesting AI diagrams. Wrote this. He said he had found 18 different defect prevention methods, or methods for preventing software defects. And you'll see some of his specialties like function points down here and things like that. But he was very good at analyzing methods, collecting data on them, how effective they were. And you'll find that in his books and papers, free books charged. Now, in connection with this lecture, I decided to see what had happened since 2012. I still thought this was overwhelmingly many things there. So I asked my favorite AI question, give me, if you can, 100 methods. Now, I asked for 100 and I got 100, but in fact, if you asked for 200 or more, you'd probably get them up into the limit where the AI system is trained. So I'm going to enlarge this, and we're not going to go through it in detail. I just wanted to show you that on request, there is an overwhelmingly large quantity of defect prevention methods. So here's the first part. We can see that there are some methods attached to the idea of requirements to prevent defects, like use case and user story validation. And one I'm going to go through here, specification and quality control. Okay. And then there are ideas of designing to meet requirements, and I'm going to do a little bit more detail on that, design to quality, I call it. And then there are some processes, and I'm going to go through a couple of my favorite processes. But they're together with all the other stuff, and I'm not saying that my favorites are the best ones or even the best ones for you, but I think we need to, like Deming says, bring all others, bring data to the table. So I'm trying to begin to collect some very rough data about how effective things are and what their costs are. And those are the things that'll tell you which methods you should prioritize. Here's more, the next from 41 to 80 out of the 100, where there's some coding practices like pair programming and code reviews. There are some testing practices. Many of you will be in that area. And there are some AI practices, the new stuff with LLM. So it's quite a wide variety of stuff. Here's the last 20. So culture and teamwork. I'm thinking of writing a book about teamwork. It's an interesting subject, isn't it? And then there's the last group is measurement and analytics, my favorites. I'm the guy who wrote software metrics in 1976. Here it says software quality metrics, but that's still software metrics. And here are some of the things I'm interested in green. So extremely wide variety from a large number of categories. And you can, of course, you can use my list here, but you can just ask your favorite AI any subset of these or meta set of these questions. I then said, well, give me some more data. So for example, I said, what are the main effects of these? Are there any complementary methods that should be used together with it, like code review used with pair programming? Interesting, the idea of combinations, because we're all going to have to combine this with that. And so very specific ideas here. There's some links here, which generally go to pretty good papers on the subject. So, I'm hoping that my slides will allow those links to be live, but I'm not sure. If not, tell me and I'll send you the PowerPoint or Keynote version. Here are some links to these are links to the method. Here are some links to case studies from the method. Again, you can ask for this and get it yourself. Give me links on the method, give me links on the case studies. I then said, how many papers do you find that you're trained on? So we get some idea of the research done on the method. Then I said, how effective are you? By the way, there's an enlargement on the next page, so I should probably be a nice guy and show you the enlargement. So here are the papers, right? And then what percentage of IT organizations claim to be using this method? Some methods are up there in the 70s and some methods are down there at 10%, like the recently popular, if you like, design by contract. If you don't know what that is, you look at this link. You want some case studies, you look at this link. And by the way, what effectiveness do these methods have in defect prevention? So the first thing you'll see is it doesn't say 100% anywhere. Well, there's a 95%. Wow, formal methods. Oh, those are those very expensive things that only academics do and no real people do. So that's not good news. And there's one at 80% formal inspections. I'm going to talk about that. I wonder how many of you do formal inspections. And here's another piece of data I asked for. What phases of software engineering, like these just apply to code. These apply to the design phases. Oh, here's one on architecture. So it's since one of the games we're going to play is to shift left or go upstream, it's important to know how far upstream you can go and get some effect. Okay, so what's that? Make your own table. The prompt should be fairly obvious. I've actually hidden the prompts normally in the notes for the slides. So if you get my full copy of slides, you'll get the notes. But I took a couple of the links and just to show the papers that popped up. These links are real and they actually contain fairly relevant information. Again, you can ask for any type of links you want, and in any language you want, for that matter. Sure, we have an international audience here. So that's the second group from 51 to 100 with some detail of them. Let's see if we have any friends here. Architecture reviews for resilient, fault-tolerant design patterns. Okay, and then the main effects of those, and access to case studies. And let's see, just following that along here, 60 papers on the subject. That should do you for this evening. And 25% of the organizations, believe it or not, are using design patterns for resilience and fault testing systems. And the effectiveness of defect prevention ranges, as reported, between 35 and 55%. And of course, it applies to design. Okay, so these are ways of, everybody's different. Everybody has different specialties and cultures they're interested in. So you need to start from a big overview and then go and figure out what you want to do. This is just an enlargement of that. Then, to simplify your lives, because this was overwhelming, I'm sure, but that was the point. It is overwhelming, but we need that overwhelming knowledge because not everybody needs the same one or two techniques. Some, maybe one organization out there that only needs one of those techniques and none of you others need it, but they need that one because they're doing this and that. So I put in a request for the top 10 software defect prevention methods, and here they are. And we're going to talk about that one, and we're going to talk about that one, and we're going to talk a little bit about that one. So, but we're not going to talk about all of these. But there's the top 10. Now that's a generic top 10 for everybody. Your top 10, if you give it a little bit more information, who you are, what you're doing, is going to be different. But you can ask for a top 10 or top 3 or top 1 for that matter, whatever you please and get. Here's even some notes about the cost effectiveness, the return on investment from these, which your financial director might like to know about before he funds you with a big budget for doing it. I also, since the links were sort of hidden in the slides here, I felt a little guilty. So I said, hey, give me free literature downloads, your top 20 highly useful for the defect prevention. So this is your homework or your reading. You can start with that one and work your way down the list. Or if you're academic or student, that gives you a good starting place. Here's one of them, number 17, looks like this, fairly academic, from Pakistan of all weird places. I don't expect we have anybody from Pakistan here. I guess they're busy fighting a war with the Taliban right now, but hopefully they have some good advice on defect prevention. So to a topic called Upstream or shift left, here's my reasoning for why it's important. See, the problem is everybody starts with their code and testing, and they find defects in testing and they fix them, and then somebody says, 95% of all your defects in code actually are in the requirements, and they're because you have bad, unclear requirements. Oh, so maybe you should actually do quality control on your requirements, and one requirement, which is bad, might cause 10 bugs. So maybe if you clarify or increase the quality of that requirement specification, you won't get 10 bugs. By the way, there's another problem many of you know about. If you test your code to find defects, you won't find 100% of the defects that are there. You might, as a very rough approximation, depending on the quality of your testing, find 50%, half of them. If you're really, 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 really good, you might find 90%. But nobody seems to know how to find all the defects by testing. So now, if you remove the defect in the requirements that's causing 10 bugs, effectively those 10 bugs won't happen. It's the same as finding and fixing 100%, which we don't know really how to do with normal testing. But if you go upstream to the requirements, which is the root cause of the bugs, then you get them all because they don't happen. So this is widely recognized, widely talked about. Maybe the practice isn't as good as we'd like to see, but some of you are definitely there. So the message is you need to go upstream. You need to shift left towards the origin of the bugs, and that is the most cost-effective thing to do. Don't attack the code, attack the requirements. It might be as much as 100 times more cost-effective to do so. Okay, so that's been known a long time, but I still find people talking about their bugs in their code and their testing and requirements. Is that user story stuff? What do we do there? I don't know. Okay, so now our main subject, when I'm going to spend more time than other methods, is my favorite. It's called the defect prevention process. Now, the nearest cousin that many people know a lot about are retrospectives and stand-up meetings and things like that, where we're sort of asking what went wrong, could we do any better, kind of informal. This is a lot more formal, so maybe it costs a little bit more, but not much. I mean, in practice, we're talking half an hour every week. That's not much. What do you get? Well, you get a vast reduction in your defects. That's worth it. So people who know about it do it. It was first published in 1990. That's 36 years ago, isn't it? Did I get that right? In the IBM System Journal, which absolutely all IBM customers got a free copy of. And Robert Mays from Research Triangle Park in North Carolina was, together with Carol Jones and Holloway and Strudinsky, the inventor of the method. In fact, he won a $50,000 prize from the chairman of IBM and a very nice diploma. I went and visited him in North Carolina to talk about the method and exchange trips. And I kept in contact with him. He helped me write some of my books. But this is the original, and you can get the original. Now, at one point, 3 years later, I said, I love your methods. I'm writing a new book together with Dorothy Graham, who's very well known in the testing community and lives in near Manchester in England, Macclesfield. And we wrote a book together called Software Inspection. And a free copy, digital copy of Software Inspection, you can get right there from that link. Enjoy. Probably can buy a used copy for $5 if you want to fool with paper. But books like this are nice because you can turn them into an AI system and say, tell me what I need to know, and so I don't have to read the book. So I invited Mays to do 2 chapters. Here's one on process improvement. Okay, that's chapter 7. And here's chapter 17, and he wrote these in detail. Dorothy and I edited a lot and stuff like that. But the author, the credit here is Robert Mays personally, and probably his colleagues like Carol, and things like that. And so you can go to, and these are as good as the papers, if not better, that he wrote, that I cited. Now, here's an illustration from chapter 7 of my software inspection book, and I'll give you a little peek at what's going on. So issues and defects occur, and they are found in testing, and they are found in some kind of reviews or inspections, which is called static testing. Okay, now you can just fix them when you find them. But in the defect prevention process, you might spend a half an hour a week with your team and say, well, we found 100 bugs or defects. Which one of them are frequently occurring, keep on recurring? Is there a root cause, like we don't have a tool, or people aren't trained well enough, or people are pressured for time and they don't have time to do things further? Those are root causes. You could do 5 Japanese 5 whys root cause analysis. But the people who made the defects and the people who found the defects, as far as I'm concerned, they're the same gang, analyze their own defects, but they analyze the frequently occurring ones, the ones that are likely to recur next week and next week until you put a stop to them. And they suggest what to do to remove the root cause, remove why they are occurring so often, whatever it is, it could be anything, okay? And they put their ideas into an action database. And an action team is, if in a larger corporation, is a team that says, oh, we've got all these great ideas of what to do to maybe stop the flow of defects. Shall we make some of them happen in our larger organization worldwide with all the teams? And so they do some of them, not all of them, and they put them into a library of better practices. We'll talk more about that later here too. And then they properly announce and have a kickoff meeting saying, here is a new practice. And if all of our 1,000 programmers worldwide do this practice, then we think we have found the root cause and we won't have so many bugs. And this cycle continues eternally. Okay. Here, a little bit more detail from chapter 17 of the software inspection book by Robert. Here's some examples of some real IBM defects in the code. And here are some examples of their ideas, their actions for, they've done their root cause analysis, that's sort of mystical here. But they're coming up with constructive, creative suggestions for what to do so that their organization gets better. And so they kill off the root cause of these defects and bugs, and hopefully everything gets better. That's it. Around 1989, I was working with McDonnell Douglas, later part of Boeing, but not then. And they said, Tom, we have some big problems that we're spending $10 million on solving, but it's not solved, and we're getting kind of desperate. Have you got any good ideas? I said, well, I don't know a thing about aircraft. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but you're paying me. I do know that there's this new method that IBM has come up with, which says, don't ask your outside consultants like Tom Gilb. Don't do a $10 million project which fails with a NASA guy leading it, a very arrogant one, by the way. And why don't you go to your young engineers and ask them what they think the root cause of all the defects in your engineering drawings that are making your aircraft come out late. And they said, can you demonstrate this? I said, sure, give me, they gave me a team of 4 young engineers. And we sat down and we started looking at their aircraft engineering problems. These are not software problems, although an aircraft drawing, as far as I'm concerned, it is software. It's certainly not an airplane, unless you make a paper airplane of the drawing, of course, but it's not a real metal airplane. So it's very much like our software, diagrams and specifications. It's got ideas, and some of those ideas get corrupted, and so things don't work so well. So we sat down. Now, they came up with a brilliant idea of having little templates to advise people to stop them putting defects on the drawing and in the engineering orders, 19 types of them. And I'll make a long story short, it worked. It actually gave them better than 10-time reduction in defects. And it was done like within a week or two. This $10 million project had been going on for, at least a year, if not much more, and had produced no results whatsoever. But this thing produced instant results. The engineering drawings got better. The aircraft went out more on time with better quality. So one of the engineering directors came to me and said, hey, this is so simple. No IT, just simple manual thing. We could have done this decades ago. I mean, in the 1920s and 30s when McDonnell and Douglas were building aircraft companies. Why didn't we do it? And I said, well, maybe because you were asking executives and consultants and you weren't asking your young engineers for the truth of why things were happening. You didn't respect them enough. But that's the big idea, asking the troops where the shoe pinches, the ones in the the front line of the thing there. So anyway, that was a great little victory. I got all kinds of undeserved credit for it because really what I did was empowered the young engineers for the first time, and they solved the problem brilliantly. I also made sure that when the color plastic templates were handed out to the 2,500 engineers, I made sure that the names of my 4 young engineers were on the template so they knew who'd invented it. Proper credit. They make themselves famous. Okay, so here's the basic idea of defect prevention. The main idea that people weren't doing before, not at IBM and other places, were, I like to call it grassroots wisdom. The wisdom of the troops, the people who know where the boot pinches and where it's cold in the dugout. And by using that knowledge, you're going to find out what really is causing the problems, not something a big, highly paid consultancy company suggests is the reason, not something a supplier of a bunch of hardware and software would tell you. And it turns out most of those things tend to be little practical details, hundreds of them, as we'll see. Some of the people using this method at IBM, the smaller groups reported making 200 small changes annually. The larger groups like IBM in Minnesota made over 2,000 small changes per year to their processes. That's this. Okay, so it's the many small changes, not one big idea. The big idea is ask your own people to tell you what's wrong, to come up with an idea they could stomach, they would live with. Okay, they hate these big systems built by outsiders to force them to use the new IT tool that doesn't really work. They hate it. But management will impose it on them because management just spent $10 billion and they don't want to look silly. So they impose bad, expensive systems that don't work on the troops. Old story. Some of you have lived that, I'm sure. So, okay, that's the big idea. One thing that happened in my aircraft customers, including Boeing, was they didn't just put in ideas and say, try it out. They always measured. They always had, like, in practice, 3 people who did nothing but put data in a database and measured how well every increment worked. Okay? So you don't do things on faith in these engineering cultures. All others bring data except God. Okay? And that's how they knew that our methods were. Here's a policy that the chief technical officer might like to know. Well, hey, how do I do this? What do I, I've got the authority, I've got the budget. Well, first directive is you guys will figure it out. We're not going to hire outside consultants. You're the best consultants we can get. You're our own people doing work in our own company. And then second directive is, this is the analysis of frequent defects and root causes. Second is, when it comes to solutions, strategies, designs, whatever you want to call them, the means to get rid of these problems, then you guys will be the designers of your own working environment. And we will have, you guys need to get on with your day-to-day work, but in a larger corporation, we will have people who will spread ideas that work and measure that the ideas work. You guys just tell us what works for you locally, but we will spread them to the thousands, and we will measure how they work for the thousands, and good ideas will be kept and bad ideas will hopefully disappear. If people come up with good ideas, you'll do like I did the simple version of, I made sure my young engineers' names were on the tool handed out to the 2,500 engineers. That is rewarding smart ideas. You could give money, like Robert Mays got $50,000 from the chairman of IBM. That's nice too. And what about both? Recognition and money. Whatever works. This process is not absolutely free. You need this corporate group that's going to spread the ideas and the database and stuff like that. How much money should you spend investing in making things better? Here's a rough approximation. There are various numbers that people cite they use, like IBM, but let's just take a number like 5% of your total budget for everything is a reasonable approximation of how much you should budget for making things better every day, every year. Okay, not 0%, and probably not 95% either. So 5%, I could say 5% plus or minus 4% would be an even better range for ballpark. Depends on who you are, but serious organizations invest in their future of getting better. And what's the management responsibility? Well, not to tell people how to do their work, but to enable people to do this work and to make sure there is money and time allocated. We had serious problems at McDonnell Douglas getting these engineers to have time. Their own group captains were very irritated that I was sitting down with them in some meetings for a few hours and tried to grab them back to do their short-term work. For the director, Mac, that I mentioned, he protected us and made sure that these guys had time and felt good about using the time to figure out how to make work better for the 2,500, which is a very smart thing to do. But it's non-trivial because there are some directors that will quash it. We had a war with the NASA guy with $10 million, literally a war. They tried to diss us and spread fake news and everything they could because we were actually making them look bad by our simple things that were better. Okay. Now, here's a report from Raytheon, and you can get a free copy. And it's I had contact with Ray Dion, who was one of the major authors of the report. But what they did is they took inspection method and testing and used that as their source of common cause defects, the frequent defects. And then they coupled that with defect prevention process doing root cause. And they started here Now, they had an interesting measure. It's a measure of wasted time, of rework, fixing bugs and retesting them. And guess what? 43% of all time at Raytheon was spent fixing bugs that ideally shouldn't be there if you prevent them, right? So, in other words, half of everything was fixing bugs that shouldn't be there. So they started, using inspections and tests as the source of bugs. They found the common cause, the frequent bugs, and they suggested changes. Within 1 year, they were down there at about 27%. That's damned good for 1 year. The saving, remember, these people have 1 or more thousand engineers working, software engineers working here. And so you're saving 270 people's work that year. It took more sweat and blood to get much better than that, or 5 times better than that. It took actually 6 years, and there were some false starts, like good ideas that weren't so good. So they measured they weren't so good, yanked them out, and got back on track. We have the history from these people beyond this report. 2 years afterwards, they actually got down to 3 or 4%, which is 10 times better than 43%. And actually, you're saving an awful lot of expensive people. So, and if you want to really go deep, I recommend reading this report, all the struggles they had to do it, published by the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Here's a smaller case from my good friend and client, Dick Holland in London. But so they are order of magnitude, I don't know, under 100 people, under 30 IT people in London. But they used our methods for doing this, and they got more or less exactly the same result, a dramatic drop in major defects in their software. By the way, the defects were killing them. They were just about to go out of business because of their defects. So they were so happy to get major reduction in their defects using the methods. And there is a very detailed free case study from Dick Holland with his trials and tribulations and what he had to do to get there. So I recommend you read that. Here at McDonnell Douglas is an experience we had, which we found is recurrent. So here's a guy called Gary, and he's got an engineering drawing, and he is extremely talented and experienced and, does everything right. But they did a little one of my type of inspections on the engineering drawing, and they found 80 major defects. Now, by the way, if you find 80, turns out you only find a percentage of what actually exists. So that means there are order of magnitude, maybe as much as 240 defects, of which you only found 80. So if you correct all the defects you find, you're still going to have, almost like a couple hundred extra defects that you haven't found and can't correct, and you don't want that to go into your airplane. So anyway, we said, sorry, too many. We have an exit condition. I'll talk about that later, saying you can't have that many defects. It just won't work. And so Gary, very frustrated at being told for the first time in his life that he wasn't the cleverest engineer on the planet, very shocked, but he had to admit that he really did have that number of defects. So they're all listed, and they point to the rules and the standards. And so he tries again, and he gets twice as good. They only find 40 defects. By the way, that means as many as 120 exist that they didn't find. So that's not good enough. So Gary's really wondering what the hell's going on here. He tries again, and he finds only 23, and he's still mumbling. And so he tries a fourth time, and they find 8. That still means there are 16 that nobody found. That's not good enough. So he tried once more, and nobody finds any defects. What's happening? Well, actually, Gary is learning to follow the corporate standards for how to do work. And he's learning because he's motivated to learn, because he's not going to be allowed to release his work until he's learned. Okay. And there's a little joke in here. We were told that the people who were reviewing his documents said the ink wasn't dark enough. He said, there is no rule about the darkness of ink, so you cannot claim that's a defect. And they said, oh yeah, okay, well, okay. So he had 0 defect. And his engineer. Now, what we found was the 2,500 engineers were all going through this personal learning curve. And here are some of my clients bragging about how this on-the-job training is so much more effective than putting people in classrooms. They used to have 6 weeks of training after the aeronautics engineering graduates were allowed to work on the aircraft. And that wasn't very effective because, of course, they forgot almost everything they learned in their training. By learning on the job, you learn effectively to do it well. Let's see. Okay, 12, 13 more minutes. I better hurry up. But this is the main feature, so we only got through this. That's fine. I have a little book I wrote about a lot of my methods I call Deep. And what I did was I took all the methods and I tried to write deep insights. So if anybody here says, I'm a deep insight type of person, because I have to be expert, you might like that free booklet. By the way, if it's in square brackets, that means it's in the back, in the references in the back of these slides. You can get a free copy just by downloading it. So the deep insight, I already told you, the first deep insight, you don't ask consultants or managers, you ask your own people. And the second was, you don't just say, I believe in method X, so let's all do it. You experiment and improve that method and you measure that it works. And the third deep insight is, if it's a good idea for the team of 4, why not spread it to the team of 400 or 4,000 in your organization? And then the fourth deep insight is, you don't just publish, you've got a great new method. You embed it in their working standards, which they use to do their analysis and reviews on a daily basis. And if they haven't understood it yet, you refuse exit for their work until they get it, till they really have learned how to do it. Okay, so we're through, and not with the whole lecture, but I'll then more quickly skim through the rest of it. So here is the software inspection method. Now, it turns out IBM and my friend Michael Fagan invented a method and published it, and I learned that, and Dorothy and I learned that, but we started practicing it for the next 10 or 20 years. In fact, half of this inspection book are case studies with our clients. And as we implemented it, we found that we had to modify the method so our clients would be happy and it worked better. And at one point, a reader of this book, which came out in, was this 1993, I think, yeah, said, Tom, what's the difference between your method and the Fagan IBM method? And I said, I don't know, but I know we did modify it some ways, in major ways. So we got a message back from that reader. He said, I counted. I went through the entire book and compared your method, as in the book, against the IBM method. Tom, you have 400 differences, 400 evolutionary incremental changes. And some of them are very big, like we don't go through a 20,000 lines of code or something like that. So we had some radical pivots and transformations. So it's not the same method. If you see a reference to Fagan's method or IBM, that's where I started decades ago, but it is not where I ended up. I have hopefully, for example, this method is easily 100 times cheaper than the IBM method. And IBM was rich and they could afford to do things the expensive way as long as it got done. But a lot of my clients didn't have the time to let programmers spend 1 hour per page of code, 4 of them in parallel. That got too expensive. Here is a lovely little case study. I showed this last time I held a lecture for Westfall Associates, but I love to show it. This is John Terzakis. You can get details at the Terzakis reference, but Intel used my methods for 20 to 25 years over 20,000 engineers got trained in my methods. And here's a story of, it's exactly the same story as we just saw. Here's a team of Intel engineers writing the requirements for a chip that Intel's going to produce. And they produced a 31-page set of requirements, but the spec QC, according to Gilb method, found 312 defects, meaning they had 10 defects per page. Now, 10 defects per page is great for most people, because most people have 100 or 200, believe it or not. But if you measure, you will believe it. But at Intel, they've got to produce they don't have software they can update like Apple does or Tesla has. They put all their logic into chips, and then they distribute the chips all over the world. So if there's a bug, they don't just send an update. They'd have to remove all the chips at their own expense, put in new ones. So they, quite simply, Intel has 10 to 100 times higher quality standards for software, which is now hard burned into the chip. And so they actually need to be 50 times better than that. And I have to make a long story short here. By doing the same processes we did at McDonnell Douglas with the aircraft engineering blueprints, see, they get twice as good. Didn't make a lot of improvement, but now they're getting much better. Wow, they finally got 50 times better. Took them a while, okay? But what they're doing is, this is not defect removal. This is learning to do it right the first time, so they can repeat this behavior in all their following work. Okay, not bad, 50 to 1, published publicly with my name on it by Intel. See if you got any other methods like that. This we went through, running out of time. So here's the deep insight into what we can, my specification quality control. And one of the deep insights is, you don't just let people review and say, I think that's a bug, or I don't like that, or that isn't what I'd practice. You have the official rules, the laws, and you check against official rules. By the way, that method was done by the Egyptians building pyramids, and Dr. Duran put that on the cover of his quality control handbook to make that point. Okay? So the idea you need official rules to check things against, not at all obvious, because I think a lot of people do reviews by just giving it to smart people and say, review this and tell me if you find bugs or problems. But the idea of saying, no, that isn't the job. The job is, we have some official rules of our good practice. And when you review, you will review with regard to the rules. That is not obvious. I wonder how many of you say, oh, we don't do that. We didn't do that. Maybe something to think about. Let's see, what have I got on my 5 minutes left, maximum? I'm making the assertion that evolutionary development, I'm writing a new book called Split. I'm just finishing it off now. You can get that. And I've written last year a book called Evo, which is about my form of agile known as evolutionary development. And here's the evolutionary cycle, very similar to Dr. Deming's plan, do, study, act. And haven't got time to teach all that. Here's the deeper idea of, why does Evo prevent defects? In short, because you're constantly, you get every day or every week, you're getting feedback, just like you would by testing, for example, but not necessarily by testing. And you use that information to prevent defects. Long story short, just another source of the bugs. I did something I've never done before. I asked AI to tell me if my ideas of evolutionary delivery, which is the basis for Agile, according to the Agile Manifesto guys like Jeff Sutherland and Kent Beck, but I also is the source of the Department of Defense, Department of War, evolutionary acquisition. And I was pleased to know that I had more influence than I actually realized. So a little bit of bragging rights here. And let's see, what have I got? I got 3 minutes left. Can I do entry, task, exit? Well, yeah. let's see if we can do it in one picture. This is a method developed by Ron Radis at IBM, published in IBM System Journal. And they're really just gateways. Many of you would know these as gates or gateways, but it's a formal way of trying to avoid garbage in and trying to avoid garbage out. Now, by definition, mechanisms like that prevent defects from going downstream. And that's the quick version of this, but you might like to study it in more depth and say, are we doing anything like this? Here are examples of, for example, rules that I talked about. There's this very simple rule, tell us where the source is so we can use that in a review to determine whether it agrees with the source. Very good, solid rule, but a lot of people don't have the rule, they don't practice it, and therefore you can't find the defects. Okay, and etc. There's my old friend I used to take to the ballet in London, Dr. Deming, and my partner in everything, including the evolutionary method, and for 30 years, Kai, who's now doing a startup, having a lot of fun, and we'll end the ETX. There is, gosh, I have 2 minutes, so I'd like to tell you about my old buddy, Fred Brooks, who many of you will know, and Dr. Duran, who I at least met once and tried to talk him into doing Fagan's inspection in Minnesota. And both of them were very clear about the idea that you get qualities by designing it in. And you can now get free downloads of that book. You might have to pay for that one. And you need to learn something called design to value. In other words, design to your value of having low defects, okay? Or dynamically designing, meaning every iterative agile sprint, you designer in the loop. And, oh, that's so much fun. Okay, so long story short, design or architecture, here are some of my clients reducing their technical debt by designing to 10 different aspects of updating and fixing bugs in programs by using 1 week every month to do it. So they don't say, we'll wait until we have time to tackle the technical debt. They said, we're going to tackle it every month, 1 week a month, which is a very good idea. And that's the end of the lecture. And by God, on the hour, here are those references, etc. So I'm stopping there, and we're going to hang in there for questions. Let's see.
And with that, let me go to our questions. Let me pull this up real quick. The first question comes from Mark. Tom, how do you know if you have all of the right rules defined?
Okay, so number one, you will never know for sure. Even if you have, by accident, a perfect set of rules, conditions will change around you, like technology and cost, which mean that you need some new rules that you didn't need before. Okay, so now the process I talked about here, the defect prevention process, this is a process of adding changes to your organization. Now that includes the rules, okay? So one of the ways of fixing your process is to fix a rule, either write a better one, a clearer one, a different one, an automated one with AI. But so the defect prevention process is one way of keeping your rules as up to date as you can. But you have, I think it's like Jerry Weinberg used to say, if you think you found the last bug, guess what? There's still at least one left. Okay. And if you think you have all the right rules, guess what? I'll bet you there's at least one rule you ought to make that you don't know about yet. So the answer is never, but 99% ain't too bad in our world. So be happy with darn good, and as good as humans can make it, and leave the rest to our Father in heaven. Perfection.
That's why we call it continuous improvement.
Yes, thank you, Linda. Right, absolutely.
Okay, Monica asks, how can organizations systematically capture and integrate grassroots wisdom from team members into the defect prevention strategies?
Right. So again, the case study I gave at McDonnell Douglas, I had directors who had the power to grab me a team and give it to me in spite of evil forces opposing us, and sit down and try it out. So number one, try it out. Do it once or twice. Ask those people how they feel about it. Let them make changes and measure how good it is for them. In other words, step one is experiment with the idea. If it doesn't work, let me tell you something. You're just not doing it right. So say, let's read the instructions once more. Maybe we forgot a little detail like empowering them to do X or something. So now, if you do it right, you will get improvements which are measurably better. Now, that will make management want to spread it. Like, let's just say you have 100 four-person teams floating around your corporation. Instead of the one who was the pilot, you spread this, maybe 10 teams, if that works well, maybe to all teams. Eventually, all teams ought to be doing it, even if it's just a half an hour a week. Their management says, I hereby change your budgets. You have a half an hour a week to do defect prevention. And we're looking for really great ideas, flooding the whole rest of the organization from your nimble minds. Okay, so that's my short answer, Monica. And hi, I'm guessing which Monica it is.
Yeah. And I would say part of that is having a quality management system with defined processes, the ETV type methodologies, where you are literally having communication channels through management where people can escalate their good ideas up to management, so management can incorporate them into your quality management system and communicate them to everybody else. So you've got to have some formal communication channels up and back down. And typically
Absolutely.
your quality management system is that.
Yep. Yes.
And those are the questions we have. I've got several thank yous, great talk, etc. type comments, but that is our 2 questions for today. Any final words or comments, Tom?
Yeah, I'm retired and I just have an awful lot of fun. And part of my fun is answering people's questions and supplying them with materials for free. So don't hesitate to email me, tom@gilb.com, and or LinkedIn or however, and exploit me for your own evil purposes.
And I agree with Tom. That's why I do these webinars. But I am also in the process of retiring this year, hopefully doing less of work and more of fun, because I consider this stuff great entertainment. I love to learn. So I agree with Tom. Here's both his contact information as well as mine, and we'd love to be a resource for you. And oh, by the way, retiring doesn't mean ending these webinars. That's one of the commitments I've made to myself, is as long as I'm physically and mentally able to do these, I will continue to do these webinars long after retirement.
Hurrah!
So thank you all very much for your kind attendance, and we will see you next week when Robin's going to present the difference again between QA, QC, QM, and QE. So we'll hopefully see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.